Hello, everybody, and welcome to my weekly Cult Situation Report, or welcome back if you are new. I'm Danielle, a scholar of cults, extreme groups, and extremely bad leadership, and I wrote a book called Uncultured about growing up in the Children of God religious cult and going into the cult of the U.S. Army. You can always get signed copies in the notes. Every week, I give you a roll-up of what has gone on in the world of cults and in my world of cults. So let's get started. Over the last 2 weeks, I have talked a lot about AA because every cult scholar ever has had to confront the question, what about the military and what about AA? I like to say I'm the only cult scholar that doesn't give the military their cult exemption. But many cult scholars and experts are talking about AA and 12-step programs in general, also large group awareness trainings, EST, landmark, and anything that ends in Oni Robbins, and how they use coercive cult tactics, right, to nefarious ends. And I say this thing where if you have a good story to share about AA, you can share that in many places. If you have a bad story, there isn't a lot of places. So I will always be the places for the bad stories. So somebody asked me, okay, what are the bad stories? Okay, so there are three things of big concern with AA. One is called 13th stepping. And when your organization has a name for it, it is an organizational problem. And 13th stepping is predatory sexual advances from long-timers toward the new people, usually the young women kind of new people. And by the way, if you have to hit on someone early on in their presence in your organization because it won't be successful later, that is predatory. It's often, in my opinion, straight outright ends up being assault. So 13th stepping, right? Well known enough that it has its own name and a documentary called The 13th Step by Monica Richardson. Okay, second of all is the blaming and the shaming. Right? Blaming and shaming and coercion and manipulation. And telling people that if they aren't in your organization, they are going to die. Jails, institution, and death is the only outcome, right? So many people end up taking their lives because they are given hopelessness from AA. So that's the second big problem. And the third big problem is the exploitation of labor, like any cult. And I was asked this week both about the military and AA, what's their goal? Money and power. Their goal is money and power. And people try to come in and say, well, every AA is distinct and separate and they don't have an organization. That is a lie. AA is a registered organization. It has a board. It has executives. You can Google how much money they make. There is international leadership, national leadership, and regional leadership. It is a lie. But I also like to point out that I just don't accept this from organizations anymore. We don't accept this as a society from for-profit organizations. If I got hurt at a Six Flags and Six Flags came back and said, every Six Flags is different, you just have to find the one that's right for you, we would not accept that. But we accept it from the military. We accept it from nonprofit organizations like Girl Scouts and AA. We accept it from mission-based things. No, it's not good enough. If you want to be considered a good organization, get your chapters in line. Okay? Do you need a diffuser to diffuse all that blame? No. You can go after someone legally for using your organization's name if they are not upholding your values. But the big thing I have to everyone is stop coming here and attacking me for talking about the dangers. Go fix your organizations. If you're part of a good AA chapter, awesome. Get mad about the fact that they're trafficking human beings in DC Midtown AA and do something about it. As soon as AA stops harming people, I will stop talking about the harm that they cause. And that's the final thing I have to say to people. They're like, you're risking, people are contacting me to be you're risking alcoholics. And yo, I'm not just incredibly well informed about everything, but I just flew off the handle with AA. I have done the research. I know what other scholars and thinkers are writing about it. And I have done the sociological research of 3 years of collecting the stories of survivors. My final thing that I have to say about AA for this video is you don't have to call it a cult. You can call it whatever you want. But I'm here to tell you that the cult scholars and the cult educated people are the ones picking up the pieces. We are the ones dealing with the survivors that have all of the same trauma that we see from the world's most extreme cults. This is something that I say in my book, Uncultured, in the epilogue. Why, if the cult I grew up in, the Children of God religious sex cult, was so different from other kinds of groups, the ones we consider good, normal, and necessary in our society, our schools, our sports teams, our armies, our churches, our social clubs, our fraternities, our academic institutions, our companies, our self-help organizations. Do so many of these institutions share such obvious similarities to the toxic group behavior that surrounded me growing up? Why does every struggle that applies to cult survivors trying to make it in the system also apply to military veterans trying to make it in the civilian world, and also apply to people who consider themselves survivors of AA? I have so many consulting clients who are from AA who are trying to deconstruct their AA experience, who come to my cult book club and cult theory book club, who come to in-person cult happy hour in College Park, Maryland once a month, right? Like, they have the same exact trauma as I have and as I recognize in all of the cult survivors that I work with. So call it what you want, call it what you want to, but like, this is the reality. We are picking up the broken people. If you want your organization to be thought of as good, then make sure it's doing good things. Otherwise, you're going to get me talking about you. And the same thing happens. Someone reaches out to me and goes, I read your book and my heart goes out to you. But how dare you compare Girl Scouts to a cult and AA? And is everything a cult? Is Martin Luther King a cult? Are labor unions a cult? I mean, I get asked the labor union question all the time, and I think that's a valid question. I don't know the answers. I haven't heard very many things about or against labor unions. But like Girl Scouts, problematic trafficking in labor. If your multi-million-dollar organization can't survive without the labor of children, you're not a good organization. And by the way, it is my job to compare everything to a cult. And I remind you always that no good organization is hurt by being compared to cults. This woman had the nerve to say that I was hurting cult survivors like myself by talking about it. And I have the nerve to say back, maybe you've never heard of the cult wars, but the only people that don't want you talking about cults are the people that want you in their cults. I believe that I am doing the world a service by comparing all of your normal organizations and leaders to cults and cult leaders. I think we can learn as much from the bad groups and bad leaders, and I think we study the extremes to understand everyone else. And I find it to be really curious that we don't stop and say, if the woman who grew up in the super extreme cult is saying that there's things in this group that remind her of it, maybe we should listen instead of just saying, no, how dare you? I read your book, so now you owe me sharing the same opinion. Okay. Also, please don't tell cult survivors how to talk about their cult experiences. Like, how dare you say that to me? I am not hurting other people. I am helping other people find the language and context to talk about their experiences. Thank you. Have a day. Okay. I also this week had a very hard day. It was Tuesday, December 10th, and that was the day that my kid brother passed away a year ago after successfully completing suicide. So I scheduled it on my calendar to be a day of grief and rage, and it was, and I needed that. And I woke up in the morning and, I put on my whole black outfit and fascinator and was listening to sad music and bawling and knitting Cold Baby before she goes to school. She says, it looks like mommy just woke up emo today. And so we had a discussion about that, right? Like, yeah, today is a sad day and I want to just spend some time being sad and feeling my feelings. And oh my gosh, there was a dense fog It was perfect. I went out to the woods in my cape where I did the wild rumpus for his celebration of life and spent time with my brother and just kind of spent the whole day either talking to people on the internet about the cost we pay as cult babies and like needing to remember, but also just needing to be mad, right, for this cost that we continue to pay. Last year I had 2 very significant suicides in my life, but every year of my adult life, coming from a community of cult survivors and veterans, like I am losing someone to suicide every single year. One of the things about my brother is that he would consistently say, like, he didn't suffer badly enough in the cult because he was a boy. He didn't suffer badly enough in the army because he didn't deploy. And then we buried him, So please, veterans, go get your health care, go get your mental health, go get the money that they owe you for the parts of your body and mind that they broke, that they promised to pay you for. And just, it took me about 13 years to get through my decade of deconstruction, and I came around to anger the last. But I think it's important to give our anger a place to live and understand that, like, we are allowed to be angry for the lives that we had to lead and the lives that we didn't get to lead because we just so happened to be born into cults and gifted with all of this trauma. And so many of you were very supportive and lovely and helpful, and I felt real community and support and shared your stories with me, and it was great. So thank you. And sure enough, I woke up the next day and I felt a lot better, and I'm going to do this every year to just take the time to remember. Okay. In my world of cults, what is very exciting is I wrote down all the words for the 10 chapters that correspond with my 10-part list of cults. And so now, for the first time ever, Culting of America, the book, exists outside of my head. It is very far from being done. It is very poorly written and brain dumped, but that's okay because now we can work on it. So we've had our publishing meetings, and we are going to publish Culting of America in November of next year. We are going to start a GoFundMe in January. That's going to be the way you can do pre-sales and stay in contact, especially if different social media bans go through. Thanks for following me on here, all of you people from TikTok and Instagram as well. So now I have, the really exciting part is I just get to read through it all the way, right? Because it's only lived in my head this whole time. And I think I've done a pretty good job of getting almost everything I know about cults down onto the page in this theory. So it's 10 chapters and the skinny white woman, which I have gotten the introduction, the prologue, the first very long chapter, and the second normal chapter back from my editor. And so they are in almost final form. And one of the things that I do when each chapter gets done is I record a video of me reading it, and that lives on my Patreon. The links are in the description if you are interested. Also through my Patreon, we run the book clubs. We do a cult memoir book club and a cult theory book club, and you can find all of my stuff there, including my 2 podcasts. But yeah, so it's not really done. I still have to write one more chapter that's called Just Groups, which will be a relatively short chapter where I basically remind you that all these 10 chapters we've been talking about, there are no simple answers. There's no line in the sand, right? Things are not binary. So I'm not going to give you an easy answer on good groups or good cults either. It's difficult. They're just groups. And then I'm going to give you some lists of things that I have built to help us navigate these groups and systems that we are in. One of them is my 10 commandments for good groups that are not cults, that corresponds with the 10-part definition of cults we've just read about. One is my 20-part guru gotcha checklist, red flags for leaders. And then one is my 15-part red flags for toxic AF groups. Hopefully, how culty is your organization survey, which I'm going to be looking for someone to help me put together. Okay. And then finally, I'm going to kind of pop back in and remind you that the people that come up with the good group and community solutions probably don't look like me. Historically, not the good guys. And then I'm going to pass the baton to White Woman Whisperer. If you've heard our podcast together, Hey White Women, Rebecca, she's an amazing thinker and creator, and she is going to contribute a chapter on groups versus community. And when I say contribute, she will be well paid. And that is going to kind of be what we leave the book with. You know, there's no easy answers, but here's how we work hard. And then I'm going to pop back in for a chapter called You Belong With Me. And yes, it's chapter 13. And yes, it's about superfan behavior. And no, I don't think I'm going to find what most people want me to find, which is that Swifties are a cult. I think, in fact, Swifties are probably an identity, and a cult has to be a group. But we're definitely going to look at the research that's out there on superfan behavior and sports fan behavior and just see what that gives us. It's definitely going to open with my theory on how the Eras Tour is a little tiny mini cult experience. So stay tuned for this book, which of course we will hear about a lot all of next year. So there's going to be much more Culting of America content on Patreon as well. Okay, my host daughter is coming. Actually, this week I'm going to be in a Brazilian wedding. And at the same time, my host daughter from Brazil is getting here. When our child was 1 year old, we were living in Seattle. We had an exchange student come live with us. This is about 8 years ago. She actually got here the day that Donald Trump took office the first time. Which I wasn't ready to say anything. And so I got a master's degree, wrote a book, built a platform, and now here I am with a book, post-Trump election, that explains to you what just happened. Anyway, she was 16 when she came to stay with us. She is now a 24-year-old medical student. She's halfway through Brazil's 7-year process of becoming a surgeon. And so we are going to be talking a lot on my channels about medical school and medicine and the cultiness of it. Also the difference between the Brazilian way of doing medical care and the American, because as I suspect, we're going to find the American way to be more culty. If you are someone that wants to go live on a TikTok or Instagram discussion with us, stay tuned, or just come watch me, because it'll be fun to watch me speak in Portuguese and then translate things. Okay, so there's a whole chapter in Culting of America about exit costs, right? High entrance costs, high exit costs. And this question, why don't people just leave? Well, that's also kind of the question at the end of Margaret Singer's book, Cults in Our Midst, the book that we are doing next week for Cult Theory Book Club, talking all about leaving the cult, what keeps people from leaving, what helps people after they leave, etc. Those book clubs are run through Patreon as well. It's our $10 membership. We do a cult memoir book club and a cult theory book club. And those are on Wednesday nights, the second and third Wednesday of the month, respectively, from 6:30 to 8:30 EST to 8 EST. And if you are a Patreon subscriber at that level, you just have access to come join us whenever you want. In Cult Memoir Book Club 2 days ago, we read Rising Out of Hatred, which is about these 4 friends who finally cracked the brainwashing of the boy who was considered kind of the heir of white nationalism. And I like people to read it for 2 reasons. One, if we grew up in white-led American cults, we probably have a lot more white supremacy inculcated into us than we realize. So I like to put that on everyone's radar as a thing we need to deconstruct. But also because you see how very, very difficult it was, and how these people worked for 4 years with basically no sign that it is going to work to eventually crack this man's brainwashing. And, you know, I get asked all the time, like, so how do we get our family out of cults? As though there's an easy answer. You know, if I knew how to do it, even if it was difficult, if I knew how to do it, I would be very, very, very wealthy and probably not doing this anymore, right? Like, there's no guarantee of success, and it takes usually a very, very long time. In my opinion, it's almost impossible to crack another adult's brainwashing because we buy into our own indoctrination. That's the truth. This week, I finished chapter 10 of the book, as I mentioned, and that's the one on ends justifies the means mentality. And it's the fastest chapter of the book that I wrote because it turns out I have been writing prolifically about extremism and our country ever since January 6th. And so brought a lot of things that mostly never got published and put them together. We are talking about Ends Justifies the Means mentality, the road to extremism. After the chapter opens with QAnon, then I'm going to tell you about my ex-husband, who was a public raging white supremacist a decade after I married him, and who the army had to kick out for his violent rhetoric and white supremacist beliefs as a major in the army. And then we're going to talk about extremism in the military and extremism in our country, how it works, how it grows, finishing off, of course, with the cult of MAGA. And oh, hey, you know who was just made Time Person of the Year? Donald Trump. And you know who was Time Person of the Year in 1938 or 33? Give me a minute. It was Hitler. Okay? Hitler was Time Person of the Year. Oh, come on. Yep, it was 1938. So there you have it. It's also probably a way to make Taylor Swift immediately feel less proud of being it last year. Okay. This week I released 2 podcast episodes. Cults and the Culting of America was an episode about recovering from purity culture. We talked to Maddie Jo, who wrote a book called Sex, God, and Rich People. So check that one out. Recovering from purity culture and why cults are always using purity requirements to control us. We also released an episode of Hey White Women, and it's called Wicked Takes on Wicked. We had a very interesting discussion about Wicked that surprised me. And it was really, a lot about what Black women think about Cynthia Erivo, a non-African American. She's English, getting to play these, roles of Harriet Tubman because she has said not nice things about Black Americans. But also just my partner on Hey White Women's general frustration that we're still letting white men tell Black women's stories. It was a very interesting, nuanced conversation. She had not seen it. I had. I found Wicked to be actually to me, it was just like an interesting message on whiteness and the damaging effects of whiteness and the way whiteness asks us to compromise for power. I also think, of course, the wizard, that's very culty. There's a lot of things in Wicked. It's a good movie. I definitely suggest watching it. And then one thing that I definitely wanted to point out is Ariana Grande is about this big in the movie. I mean, she's very, very tiny. She doesn't look like she's ever eaten a thing in her life. And this is a larger part of skinniness coming back into the mode, which happens every time women start fighting for their rights. And oh, by the way, cults always want you skinny. So it is important right now to push back against this skinny aesthetic and have these conversations. Tressie McMillan Cottom, who I love, who's a Black woman who writes for the New York Times. She's writing a book called Blonde, The Politics of Beauty, and she writes all about this stuff. And she had some very good stuff to say. So just Google her name and Wicked, and getting a Black woman's take on this movie, I think, is just very important. So go check out our podcast. It is posted on YouTube or Patreon. If you are watching this, you can find the podcast as well. Knitting Cult Puppy has thoughts. Oh, and finally, I'm going to just talk a little bit about hanging out with maybe your MAGA family members this holiday and how you are going to survive that. And I think one of the things is just really to understand right now that you're not going to be cracking the brainwashing of your family members. They have just, for all intents and purposes, won their apocalypse. But the thing that I say about being in the business of predicting the future is that you don't have to argue. You just have to wait, right? Eventually, his policy is we're going to know we're living in a cult. We're going to feel it, not just know it like some of us do. So in the meantime, I suggest, what do you do with family? You disengage. You ask questions. If you have to engage, you don't have to argue. You can just ask them questions about why they think what they do and just refuse to engage back. And then finally, I remind you that disassociation is a tool. And there's chanting really helps us disassociate. So I'm going to give you this little military chant that might be of use for you as you're just like having an extra glass of wine and taking a step back from Uncle So-and-so. And the chant is, here we go again, here we go again, same old stuff again, same old stuff again, marching down the avenue. I suggest you put something in there that means something to you. You know me and I know you. You know me and I know you. Right? Not going to change your mind, so we're just going to wait. And while we are waiting, I suggest learn to tell it better. What does that mean? Learn to talk about what worked for you. What made you woke? You don't have to ever have been MAGA to have been a white person who is now more woke than you used to be, because I hope that we all are, right? If you are a liberal now, I am sure there are thinkers, there are things that worked for you, there are things that cracked your brainwashing about different things. So I say learn to tell it better. When I was going on the process of trying to get uncultured, this book where I compare growing up in the world's worst sex cult to being a woman in the military, and I got a lot of rejections, right? And I got a lot of, I don't get it. This is 2 books, this is 2 stories, I don't get it. And I would, get really frustrated, but then I would just tell myself, like, Daniela, you have to tell it better. You have to learn to tell it better, right? If people are not getting it, that's my thing that I can work on impacting. Sure enough, sold the book for a lot of money. It gets great reviews about the writing and everything else, right? And we also know that the best person to help get someone out of a cult is an ex-member, right? So it's us, 48% of white women who didn't vote for Trump, going and getting the 52% of our sisters that did and helping them understand, with kindness, it's going to have to be, what worked for you. So learn to tell it better. Take this time. It's also a great time to decide who you still want to be in the life of and who you don't. And I say to people, like, I'm not advocating shunning. I don't think you should burn bridges with them, because one of the things that sometimes keeps people in cults is everything they've already lost and the bridges that they have already burned with friends and family, right? It's very hard to come back and say, yes, I was fooled. But that doesn't mean you have to be in their lives in the same way, intaking all of their toxic behavior all the time. You can step back and be the person who they know is going to be there when they come out of it, and hope that they do. As Margaret Singer says in her book that we're going to discuss on Monday, most people leave their cults. So that is my, sort of advice or little pieces of hope. And now for some nitpicking. Okay, so this week I was doing a lot of gifts, and so I don't have those. Mostly they've been sent out. But I finally came up with something to do with bangles. And I invented the circular logic earrings. Look how cute these are. Got some blue ones. I got some really funky, fun, crazy ones. These ones are fun and funky too. Look, little tinsels. Oh, and these are the lock earrings my husband got me after he read about the little gold lockbox in my head in my book. And look at these little wreaths. Anyways, I sell these on my TikTok, and I made a whole bunch of them. They're really pretty cool. And look, I'm even making smaller ones. Okay, so I came up with those. Here is a little Viking hat that I am doing for a newborn baby. Obviously, it still needs one more horn. Hope to finish that today. This is one of my scarfigans that someone has commissioned. So I take a scarf and I make it into a cardigan with knitted sleeves. This is these really cool peacock colored sleeves. This person bought a very expensive piece of wearable art from me and then just let me make whatever I wanted, which is of course the best thing you can do for an artist. And finally, I'm going to show off my Daniela's Technicolor Dreamcoat. And one more thing. This is for my New York wardrobe. I made another rich lady dress. We call this the rich lady dress. So I took a regular dress. It actually already had long sleeves, and I cut them off. And I put green fuzzy sleeves, and I put a nice little thing here at the bottom. And that's hopefully what I'm going to wear to the Rockettes next week. Thanks for hanging out with me for our cult situation report, and stay tuned. More next week. Coming back to say that the Mormons published a polygamy cartoon for children. So in case you were wondering, the Mormons always has been exactly a sex cult, just like the Children of God. But look, I'm going to show you cartoons for children explaining plural marriage. So that all of the children can understand it. Here's the part where Joseph Smith forces a 14-year-old child to marry him. Then he forces her to accept other women. Now we're going to show Abraham Lincoln being terrible to the church, telling them that they can't be polygamists. There was one where people were like in bed, I think. No, they're not in bed. There was one where I thought they were in bed. I guess not. Anyway, so do I have a section in Culting of America about why cults are always obsessed with cartoons? And is that absolutely going to go in there? Yes. Yes, it is. Just the Mormons saying the quiet stuff out loud. Have a day, y'all.